In 1970, when Curt Flood refused a trade from the St. Louis Cardinals to the Philadelphia Phillies, he stated a rather basic principle then, one with more than a few echoes in American history. I am a man, not a consignment of goods to be bought and sold. Today, we're going to explore the life of Curt Flood. Welcome to Productive Discourse. Productive Discourse is a conversation where we talk about the positive activities that take place within our communities. In other words, we're constantly searching for a shiny needle of common ground in that haystack of fear. Today, we're continuing our conversation on the great athletes who got their starts on the playgrounds and sandlots of Oakland, California. We're talking about athletes that exhibit what I call the 3 E's: energy, enthusiasm, and excellence. Into their passion, where many of them turned pro and won championships. Some were elected to their sports halls of fame, and many came back and served their community. Now, in our discussion about Curt Flood, I am going to cite 4 sources. The first is Home Field Advantage, Oakland, California, the city that changed the face of sports, by Paul Brekke-Meisner. The second is The Last Angry Men, an Esquire article from Richard Reeves on March 1st, 1978. I'm going to quote The Atlantic, an article by Alan Barra, July 12th, 2011. How Curt Flood changed baseball and killed his career in the process. And then an article in the Bleacher Report by Howard Burns, July 13th, 2011. Curt Flood's sacrifice, sports' most meaningful trade. So let's talk about the baseball. The baseball stories are going to knock your socks off. The first 2 years of high school, Curt Flood was at McClymonds, a Warrior. He got to play with Frank Robinson, future Major League Baseball Hall of Famer. The second 2 years, he was an Oakland Tech Bulldog, playing with Joe Gaines and Len Gabrielson Jr. Curt Flood was the first African-American to crack the St. Louis Cardinal lineup as a regular in 1958. He won 7 Gold Gloves. And based on the win share statistical analysis developed by Bill James, Flood was the best defensive outfielder in Major League history, playing in 3 All-Star games, 3 World Series, and he won 2 of those World Series. Vada Pinson, another Oaklander that went to the major leagues as a Cincinnati Red, had this quote: "There hasn't been a year in the 12 he's played in the big leagues where he wasn't a better defensive center fielder than Willie Mays." Let me read that strong quote again by Vada Pinson. "There hasn't been a year in the 12 he's played in the big leagues where he wasn't a better defensive center fielder than Willie Mays." The challenges. As great as a baseball was, there were many challenges. There was a challenge of finding a place to live. There was a challenge of housing discrimination. In 1964, with a pregnant wife and 4 small children, he found a place he liked. He signed a lease. He signed a rental agreement. And then, when the family was moving in, they were chased away by the owner, who was holding a shotgun. Flood sued and won, but it left him without illusions about what life was like to be a black man in America in 1964. Even an affluent one who had just come home from helping his Major League Baseball team win the World Series. there was more success on the baseball diamond. He helped the Cardinals get back to the World Series in 1967 and 1968, helping him win the World Series in 1967. And then there was a trade, the phone call. Tom Tomei, assistant general manager of the Cardinals, called Flood on October 8th, 1969. Curt, you've been traded to Philadelphia. You, McCarver, Horner, and Byron Brown for Richie Allen, Cookie Rojas, and Jerry Johnson. Good luck, Curt. Kind of matter of fact. Trades were normal. Well, Flood said, first I thought I would just retire. I was 32. I might only have 2 or 3 good years left. But on December 24th, I decided to sue, sending a letter to Baseball Commissioner Bowie Kuhn that said, I do not feel that I am a piece of property to be bought and sold, irrespective of my wishes. Kuhn answered, I certainly agree with you that you as a human being are not a piece of property to be bought and sold. However, I cannot see its application to the situation at hand. The next step for Flood was to go to the Major League Players Association. And at the time, the president was Marvin Miller. Miller is quoted as saying, when Flood came to me, his mind was made up. I told him that given the court's history of bias toward the owners and their monopoly, you don't have a chance in hell of winning. More important than that, I told him, even if he won, you'd never get anything out of it. You'd never get a job in baseball again. Flood asked Miller if it would benefit other players. Miller said, I told him yes, those who come later. Flood said, that's good enough for me. When Miller realized that Flood understood the odds against him and he was still determined to go ahead with the case, he told him, you're a union leader's dream. It was definitely hard times for Curt Flood. He told Reeves, I spent the summer of 1970 betting and boozing and watching my case and my career booted through the federal judiciary and to the Supreme Court. It was destined to end up there because what Flood was challenging was baseball's unique exemption from U.S. antitrust laws, an exemption sanctioned in 1922 in the Supreme Court because baseball, after all, was America. Flood was left on an island. He said, I suddenly realized that it was just me against 19 multimillionaires. The first trial in New York lasted 6 weeks. No one showed up from my team, not even my roommate. Flood's roommate was the great Bob Gibson. Only 2 former players, Jackie Robinson and Hank Greenberg, stood by and supported him. Flood said, maybe I wouldn't have shown up either. I would have probably been afraid too. In the Atlantic, Berra wrote, it was amazing that the impossible goal came heartbreakingly close to being within reach. When the decision was announced in 1972, and I'm going to read this because I want to get it right. Flood lost 5-3, but only after Judge Lewis Powell, who was sympathetic to Flood, withdrew from the case because of what he called a conflict of interest. He owned stock in Anheuser-Busch, whose principal owner, Augie Busch, also owned the St. Louis Cardinals. If Powell had remained, Flood could have won 5-4 because his withdrawal, combined with Chief Justice Warren Burger's 11th hour switch from Flood's side to baseball's, killed Flood's case. There was also a take on this in the Howard Burns article. Burns quoted Brad Snyder's 2006 biography of Flood entitled "A Well-Played Slave" for a cause he saw as bigger than the individual. Snyder's quote, "Flood versus Kuhn went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where Flood lost a 5-3 decision with one abstention. Flood wasn't expected to win, but as Snyder notes in his book, he wasn't helped by the weak oratory of his lead attorney, former Supreme Court Justice Arthur Ginsburg, who at the time was also running a failed campaign for governorship of New York as a Democratic challenger to Republican incumbent Nelson Rockefeller." The Supreme Court decision destroyed Flood. He was bombarded with hate mail from fans who accused him of trying to destroy baseball. Gibson estimated that he got 4 to 5 death threats a day. He left the country and opened a bar in Mallorca that was frequented by American sailors. He was plagued by increasing debt, including unpaid child support and guilt that he had been a bad father. Flood was finally admitted into a Barcelona psychiatric hospital. His sister sent him money to return to the United States. In one of the most moving scenes from a documentary, Richard Reeves said, "Being with him at the time was like poking a finger into an open wound. He was a broken man and bleeding." When he came back to the United States, there was interview after interview. Some were sensitive, some were insensitive. In Sacramento, after Flood talked with students, 2 television reporters waiting for him. Creighton Sanders of KXTV was a first, and he repeated old questions. Aren't these big salaries ruining baseball? Aren't ball players really overpaid? Are you trying to destroy the American way of life, you black SOB? Flood remained polite, pointing out that baseball is making more money than ever and asking how much Reggie Jackson or Tom Seaver is worth when all those people are willing to pay to watch them. The next questioner was Bill Madlock, a 27-year-old black man who works for KCRA when he is hitting .302 and earning $200,000 a year with the San Francisco Giants. Now, just a reminder, this is a 1978 article. So the money and the numbers have changed, but the context of the discussion, I believe, remains the same. Madlock asked him, "Would you do it again? Are you blackballed from baseball? Would you like to get back in?" Flood's answer, yes, yes, and yes. Madlock, who was one of the beneficiaries of the reserve clause modifications the Major League Baseball Association won in arbitration after the Flood case, was in awe of Flood. When Reeves talked with him about it later, Madlock says, "You know, if it weren't for Curt Flood, I wouldn't be living in the big house and getting a couple $1,000s for going to a banquet. I grew up in Decatur, Illinois. I saw him play a lot. He was good, but it's like war. You send your best soldier out to scout, and he doesn't come back. he's not there to celebrate the victory. Madlock goes on to say, he says he's doing fine. That's not true, is it? Following his career, Flood led the Oakland Parks and Recreation Department's Young American Baseball program. Recognition came late. Flood was given in 1992 the NAACP Jackie Robinson Award for contributions to Black athletes. And in 1994, in perhaps the most satisfying moment of his life, he gave a speech on solidarity to the players as they prepared to go on strike. The players gave him a standing ovation. It was almost 25 years to the day that he announced his suit against baseball. There were demons. There were decades of smoking and drinking that finally caught up with him. And in early 1995, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. The Players Association, urged by former legal counsel Dick Moss, paid his medical bills. Flood died on January 20th, 1997, 2 days after his 59th birthday. Jesse Jackson's funeral eulogy stands as his epitaph. Baseball didn't change Curt Flood. Curt Flood changed baseball. He fought the good fight. This is a hard one today. And this is a controversial one because since day one, baseball fans and Americans have loved to argue about the money in baseball. How much is too much? Well, what's a ball player worth? Well, as far as I'm concerned, when I go to a ball game, when I watch a ball game on TV, I'm there to watch the ball player. When Curt Flood played in the World Series in 1967, everybody watching the game wanted to watch people like Curt Flood and Carl Yastrzemski. They had no interest in watching the Augie Bush family who owned the Cardinals or the Yawkey family that owned the Red Sox. 2021, I watched Freddie Freeman of the Atlanta Braves. I watched Jose Altuve of the Houston Astros. I had no interest in the ownership of the Braves or the Astros. If we're going to pay money to watch the sports, whether it's buying a ticket or our cable TV bills, well, the players should get their fair share. And if an owner is willing to pay Max Scherzer what he pays Max Scherzer, God bless Max Scherzer. Nobody's putting a gun at the owner's head. Curt Flood moved the conversation forward. He had the strength and confidence to stand up for his beliefs, even when there was a high cost. In a nutshell, he used impeccable inspiration and impeccable integrity to change the world. I hope you enjoyed our show today on Curt Flood. This is going to be the last of our series on the ball players that came out of the sandlots and playgrounds of Oakland, California. On February 1st, I'm starting a new adventure, and I hope you join me on it. I will be joining 365 Sportscast Network with a new radio show called Negro League Baseball. The passion, the camaraderie, and the grit. Our guests and I will explore stories of strength and survival where they use their guts, their resolve, their ingenuity, and their toughness. You can access the show at 365sportscast.com or on the 365 Sportscast iPhone, Android app, or enabling the 365 Sportscast skill on your smart speaker and saying, play 365 Sports. So mark your calendar, February 1st, 9 a.m. Pacific time, noon Eastern time for Negro Leagues, the passion, the camaraderie, and the grit. But in the meantime, please like, share, comment, subscribe, so this message will go far and wide, and we'll find that shining needle of common ground in that haystack